We have a lot more family dinners now.
Yeah.
We didn't used to do that.
No, we used to eat from the TV every night.
We did not. We stopped that in 2015
when you got cancer. Yeah. Yeah. Well, she's always been super brave, and when she first got diagnosed, I wasn't really sure what was happening. I didn't really think this kind of thing could happen to someone like her, especially since she's already been through so much.
Were you ever afraid that she might not make it through it?
Sometimes.
Did you ever pray about it?
Yeah, a lot.
You did? Mm-hmm. By yourself?
Yeah.
You really did?
Yeah.
That's good to know. I didn't know that. Overall, it was a tragic experience that changed our lives forever, and yet brought us closer together. I mean, at the highest level, that's how I would summarize the experience. From the time of her diagnosis, I would say that it was, up to that point in my life, the most emotionally challenging moment to hear that my wife had breast cancer. I received the news on a text, of all things, while I was at work. When you texted me while I was at work. In the middle of talking to a coworker, I get a text. I knew she had gone for the biopsy and I knew the results were coming. And the text came through, OF, it's cancer. And I mean, in that moment, my heart just, it sank to the bottom of my stomach. I mean, it was a shock, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, in that moment, I just told my coworker, I gotta go, and I ran out of the lab and hopped in my car and just started racing home. I was making phone calls and telling people to start praying because she has cancer. When I got home that day, I mean, this was one of those days like 9/11 where you remember everything. I remember the weather, I remember the sunshine, I remember my commute home, I remember every moment that led up to getting that text. And when I got home, we sat together on a couch and just held each other. You know, in the first moments as you're processing, what does this diagnosis mean? What do we know about the diagnosis? How bad is it? Will she survive? Will she have to do chemo? Does she need surgery? When I met her oncologist, Dr. Brigade Ironwood, that was probably the moment when I really had sort of a turning point in the anxiety I was talking about, because up until that point we had met with surgeons, and you know, they're great at what they do, but treating cancer is not what they do. And so as a scientist, I really wanted to know, what does the literature say? What are the statistics? Give me her specific cancer profile. Give me that information. And turns out he was very amenable to giving me.
He was a research
guy. He was a dedicated researcher oncologist. So he was apprised of all the current literature. He was apprised of all the current recommendations. He was he had dispatched her tumor to be profiled and to get all the medical knowledge input that he needed to make a treatment plan. And talking to him, it was like, whew, I was really, really set at ease. And he was confident. I mean, he was confident that here's her cancer type, here's her profile, here's how treatments have been proven to work on that cancer. And with a significant measure of confidence, we felt like we could actually defeat this cancer and live happily ever after, as it were. So the staff at Ironwood was phenomenal. They really know how to manage people, a couple coming in where one of them has cancer, then the diagnosis is pretty recent. How do you handle that? I mean, how do you set people at ease? How do you tell them the truth and yet and get them to have hope? I mean, it's a hard balance, and they're very good at it. So my first experience at Ironwood was really positive. And it continued to be from the time of the initial appointment, through her chemo, through her radiation, and through her graduation at the end.
It's interesting. I almost don't remember what it was like to have a life before cancer, which seems odd to me actually. But I think, I mean, at the very moment of diagnosis, my daughter had a play date at our house. And it was a play date that was aborted because I called the mom and I had her pick up her kid, and it was never rescheduled again, which just sort of happened. And Tim came home from work right then. So it's almost as if all ordinary activities ceased. And I think it's important to be frank with people who are going through this. My life is good now, and it really is good, but it has never resumed that ordinariness, I think. I guess I was a working mom, and I wrote, and I was happy. My husband and I have been through a lot, and we were at a good place though, and everything twisted and became kind of dramatic. I really can't say much more about my life. I think this gave it an acuteness so that we were I think we've always been in my life very thinking about the meaning of life and what are we doing and why is it like this. But the cancer diagnosis heightened all of that, so that those kind of questions were upon us in a heavy way. Ironwood was a kind of a place that we ended up at by default, to be honest. We had the first step, I believe for me, I don't know if it's like this for everybody, upon diagnosis was to get in touch with a surgeon. And I chose a surgeon who could literally do it before I could go to Disney World, which is a whole other story that's in my book. But I got a surgeon, and he, in his office, it's only days after diagnosis, said, I know somebody over here who's an oncologist, and I believe it was Dr. Bagay, and he gave me Dr. Bagay's number, and he set up an appointment for me, so we ended up at Ironwood. And it was kind of a default situation, but right away, it was the right decision too. Dr. Bagay met with us, and he does have a calm and gentle and knowledgeable demeanor, I would say. And I liked him right away. I don't think there was any hesitation. I could tell he knew what he was doing. So there was a confidence, and it was good. And I remember shortly, if not that day, probably was that day, we ended up seeing Dr. Ambrad as well, Aaron Ambrad. And I liked him as well too. He became someone I talked about The Walking Dead with, and simultaneously got a new puppy the same time we did. And it was always a good experience. I remember going to chemo and going in to see all the chemo nurses, and they were always great. And that's a hard job. I really believe those chemo nurses are among the hardest working people ever. And I was considered, I don't know if I was considered this, but I was one of the younger ones, more healthy. I had a husband coming in with me every day or every time, so I was never alone. And these people were so, their demeanor was so reassuring and forthright, but kind. I really can only speak highly of them. I was working on a novel at the time of diagnosis, and that novel became my third book, but it didn't come out until after I was done with cancer treatment, to be honest. It kind of went on hold, and I picked up, like day one of diagnosis, I picked up a new project, which was I decided I was going to write a diary in real time, a memoir in real time, where I would literally process what was going on. And that's just the way I process things. I was never thinking to myself, I'm gonna write a book about my cancer experience. Rather, it was just, this is what I have to do. As a writer, I have to write it down. And so I did. And that eventually did become my fourth book. The novel that I was working on came out, and then I came out with the memoir. And it is a cancer memoir. However, I don't think it's like other cancer memoirs. I think it's more crazy Jennifer processing her experiences. I wanted to reach 3 groups of people, to be honest. I wanted to reach, first of all, I wrote for my children. Absolutely. I was under the impression of the thought process that I was not going to make it. And as a result, I know that I, as a person, the only thing that I can leave for them that would be near and dear, besides my love for them, is my writing, because it's what I do best. And I wanted to write them down, everything they mean to me and everything that this has meant to me, and the truth about my relationship with their dad and all this. So I wrote it for them. I also wanted to write a book on the writer's identity under siege, so to speak. What is it like to be a writer suffering with cancer? I think everybody is an individual who suffers from cancer when they have cancer. However, there was something unique about how this disease takes hold of an individual person and how it warps the thing they do. And I really wanted to talk about that to writers who always have identity crises anyways. So what's it like to be under siege, so to speak? And then I also wanted to write for women who are going through this. I think that women, there's a lot of cancer books out there. I've always thought to myself, 1 in 8 of us get cancer, breast cancer, and all of us are going to write breast cancer books. There's a million breast cancer books. And I read quite a few. I felt like there was a little bit of a deficiency in a lot of them, in that it didn't speak about some of the really intimate core things that are going through our minds, like the way it shapes your physicality is so profound. You will never be the same woman you are again. And the books say this oftentimes, but I think that I do have the ability to really get in there and scrutinize that moment. And what's it like to be pounded into a corner with the idea of thinking positively about things when you can't think positively. You're scared. And what's it like to have, I had, at the time my daughters were, I think they were like 9 and 10 or something. And I was scared to death that I had the BRCA gene. I was scared to death that my husband, who's a great guy, but ill-equipped to be a single dad, I was really afraid he was going to have to do it. And I know he could rise to the occasion, but I didn't want him to have to. And I wanted to write a book that really expressed these concerns in a real way. And so I think the book does that by taking the reader with me in various moments, ranging from chemo, surgery. I had emergency hospitalizations that probably other women experience. Going to my kids' school wearing a wig on the top of my head and having my daughter be self-conscious because mommy has a wig on her head and it's kind of obvious. Sitting in this room, I'm a English professor, so sitting in this room and grading papers from morning to night, and that's pretty much all I could do because I was nauseous and I couldn't really leave the room. The routine of day to day, the way it changed. I used to, as a writer, I would go sit in cafes and write all day. And now, because I didn't want to be in public, because I hot flash 24/7. I'm surprised I haven't yet. I hot flash all the time. There's urinary urgency. They don't tell you about this. I don't look like I used to look. There's so many different factors that really what I want to do is just stay home. And so I wanted to write about these moments. And so my book is about these things.